For months, local shelter workers had seen the sorrow in the eyes of a cat named Marbles as he awaited his fate in the crowded shelter. The day came when Marbles was to be put to sleep, a last resort for the overburdened shelter. But as the vet prepared for the procedure, he noticed something about Marbles that stopped him dead in his tracks. The vet's eyes widened with shock as he shouted, "This can't be true!" Dr. James, a renowned veterinarian, arrives at the clinic early in the morning. He is met by his faithful assistant, Sophie, and his beloved cat, Marbles. It's just another day at work, or so he thinks. As they settle into their daily routine, Sophie mentions that Marbles has been acting strange lately. The usually lively and playful cat constantly cries and refuses to eat. Concerned, Dr. James decides to examine her. After a thorough examination, James is shocked to discover that Marbles has a rare and deadly disease. He breaks the news to Sophie, who is devastated. The only solution is to put Marbles to sleep to end her suffering. Sophie is heartbroken, but they schedule the procedure for the next day. A storm suddenly hits the town as they prepare for Marbles' final moments. The winds howled, and the rain poured heavily, causing a power outage at the clinic. In the midst of the chaos, they receive a call from a distressed pet owner. Her cat is in critical condition and needs immediate attention. Dr. James is faced with a difficult decision. Should he leave Marbles and save the other cat, or stay and comfort his own beloved pet in her final moments? Sophie urges him to go, knowing how much he values all animal lives. With a heavy heart, Dr. James leaves Marbles in Sophie's care and rushes to the other cat's rescue. As Dr. James tends to the other cat, Sophie nervously waits for him to return. The storm worsens and she fears for her boss's safety. Marbles' cries seem louder than ever, and Sophie can't help but feel guilty for not being able to comfort her. After what seems like hours, Dr. James finally returns to the clinic, drenched and exhausted. But to everyone's surprise, he's not alone. The other cat, who was previously on the brink of death, has made a miraculous recovery. As Dr. James explains how he managed to save the cat's life, he realizes that Marbles' symptoms are similar to the other cats. He rushes to check on her and is astonished to find that her condition has also improved. After further examination, Dr. James discovers that the new treatment he used on the other cat could potentially cure Marbles' rare disease. With a glimmer of hope, they decide to try the treatment on Marbles. As the treatment takes effect, Marbles slowly starts to regain her strength. Her cries turn into purrs, and she even starts to eat. Everyone is overjoyed by the miracle, but none more so than Dr. James, who has found a new purpose in his work. With Marbles' recovery, Dr. James's clinic gained recognition for its groundbreaking treatment. He becomes the go-to vet for rare and difficult cases, and they receive patients from all over the country. Marbles once again becomes the playful and beloved cat she once was. Months later, Dr. James received a surprise visit from the pet owner whose cat he had saved during the storm. She brings along her cat, now healthy and happy, to thank him personally. Dr. James is touched by the gesture and realizes that sometimes miracles do happen. As Marbles and the other cat play together, Dr. James and Sophie watch with contentment. They have formed an unbreakable bond through the trials they faced, and their clinic has become more successful than ever. Dr. James realizes that sometimes hope is all we need to overcome the impossible. Marbles' cries were not those of helplessness, but rather a call for hope. And with that hope, she was able to pull through and defy all odds. From that day on, Dr. James and Sophie never gave up hope on any of their patients. They learned that with the right attitude and determination, anything is possible, and that it will always end up better. Thanks to Marbles, Dr. James and Sophie's small clinic has now become a top-notch facility. Marbles, who was once seen as a burden, has now become their lucky charm and a symbol of hope for all their patients. One evening, as Dr. James is about to close up the clinic, he hears a familiar meow. He turns to see Marbles sitting on the doorstep, welcoming him home. Tears fill his eyes as he realizes that Marbles has truly become a part of his family. From that day on, Marbles becomes a regular at the clinic, greeting and comforting patients. She even becomes a big sister to the new addition to Dr. James's family, a little kitten he adopts and names Lucky. Thanks to Marbles, Dr. James, Sophie, and Lucky have each found love, hope, and a new purpose. They continue to touch the lives of many animals and their owners, and it's all because of one small crying cat named Marble. And so the story of Dr. James, Marbles, and Sophie continues, filled with love, hope, and the power to overcome any obstacle. But little do they know, an even bigger adventure awaits them in the future. One thing is for sure, with Marbles by their side, anything is possible. Sophie, the vet's assistant, was puzzled as she watched Dr. James rush out of the examination room with a look of shock on his face. He was so flustered at the moment that she had never seen him act like that before. Dr. James quickly explained to Sophie that Marbles, Mrs. Jenkins's beloved cat, was on the verge of death. There was a chronic disease that left him in constant pain as he suffered from a rare and incurable health condition. Mrs. Jenkins, who had been Marbles' owner for over 10 years, was heartbroken when she found out about his condition. She tearfully decided to put him to sleep to end his suffering. Dr. James couldn't bear to see the pain in Mrs. Jenkins' eyes as she said her final goodbyes to Marbles. Before euthanasia could be carried out, he decided to run one more test before proceeding with the procedure. To everyone's surprise, the test results showed that Marbles did not have a terminal illness. He had been misdiagnosed. James was shocked and at a loss for words when he heard what had happened. As a result of further examination, Dr. James determined that Marbles' symptoms were caused by a severe allergic reaction to a new type of cat food that Mrs. Jenkins had recently switched to, resulting in his severe symptoms. Dr. James immediately treated Marbles for his allergy, and within a few days he was back to his old self. Mrs. Jenkins was overjoyed and grateful to have her beloved cat back. However, Mrs. Jenkins was furious with Dr. James for misdiagnosing her cat and almost ending his life. Eventually, she demanded an explanation from Marbles. She refused to pay for his medical care. Feeling guilty and ashamed, Dr. James apologized to Mrs. Jenkins and confessed that he had made a mistake. During the conversation, he promised that he would do anything in his power to make it up to her and Marbles. To make amends, Dr. James decided to give Marbles a full grooming session and makeover. He wanted to show Mrs. Jenkins that her cat was truly special and deserving of love and care. After a day at the grooming salon, Marbles emerged as a completely different cat. He was fluffy, clean, and sporting a new adorable haircut. Her eyes were filled with such awe that Mrs. Jenkins could not believe what she had seen. As Mrs. Jenkins saw the transformed Marbles, her heart melted. She realized that no matter what mistakes were made, Dr. James truly cared for animals and had a special bond with her cat. But there was no end to the appreciation Mrs. Jenkins expressed for Dr. James' efforts in saving Marbles and for his generous gesture. She even offered to pay for Marbles' treatment and gave a generous tip. Dr. James and Mrs. Jenkins became good friends after that incident. Marbles would often be brought to the clinic by Mrs. Jenkins for regular checkups, and she would always ask Dr. James what was the best thing to do for Marbles. Marbles lived a long and healthy life thanks to Dr. James' timely intervention. After coming back from the dead, he became a local celebrity and was often referred to as the miracle cat who came back from the dead. After the incident, Dr. James realized that his true passion was not just in treating animals but also in understanding their behavior and symptoms. He became an expert in diagnosing rare diseases. Dr. James became known as the humble vet, who was willing to admit his mistakes and always strive to do better. He gained the trust and respect of the community, and his practice flourished. When Marbles passed away at the ripe old age of 20, the whole community mourned. He left a lasting legacy of hope and second chances, reminding everyone that miracles do happen. Mrs. Jenkins never forgot the kindness and dedication of Dr. James. As she continued to visit the clinic regularly over the years, she brought homemade treats to share with all of the staff, especially Marbles, who was always pleased to see her. There is no doubt that the incident with Marbles taught everyone an important lesson: never give up. Always seek a second opinion and never underestimate the power of a second chance.